During the 1950s, Israel was frequently attacked by Palestinian fedayeen, nearly always against civilians, mainly from the Egyptian-occupied Gaza Strip, leading to several Israeli reprisal operations. In 1956, the UK and France aimed at regaining control of the Suez Canal, which Egypt had nationalized. The continued blockade of the Suez Canal and Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, together with increasing fedayeen attacks against Israel's southern population and recent Arab-threatening statements, prompted Israel to attack Egypt. Israel joined a secret alliance with the UK and France and overran the Sinai Peninsula in the Suez Crisis, but was pressured to withdraw by the UN in return for guarantees of Israeli shipping rights. The war resulted in significant reduction of Israeli border infiltration. In the early 1960s, Israel captured Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in Argentina and brought him to Israel for trial. Eichmann remains the only person executed in Israel by conviction in an Israeli civilian court. During the spring and summer of 1963, Israel was engaged in a diplomatic standoff with the United States due to the Israeli nuclear program. Since 1964, Arab countries, concerned over Israeli plans to divert waters of the Jordan River into the coastal plain, had been trying to divert the headwaters to deprive Israel of water resources, provoking tensions between Israel on the one hand and Syria and Lebanon on the other. Arab nationalists led by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser refused to recognize Israel and called for its destruction. By 1966, Israeli-Arab relations had deteriorated to the point of battles taking place between Israeli and Arab forces. In May 1967, Egypt massed its army near the border with Israel, expelled UN peacekeepers, stationed in the Sinai Peninsula since 1957, and blocked Israel's access to the Red Sea. Other Arab states mobilized their forces. Israel reiterated that these actions were a casus belli and, on June 5, launched a preemptive strike against Egypt. Jordan, Syria, and Iraq attacked Israel. In a six-day war, Israel captured and occupied the West Bank from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Jerusalem's boundaries were enlarged, incorporating East Jerusalem, and the 1949 Green Line became the administrative boundary between Israel and the occupied territories. Following the 1967 war and the Three Noes resolution of the Arab League, Israel faced attacks from the Egyptians in the Sinai Peninsula during the 1967-1970 War of Attrition, and from Palestinian groups targeting Israelis in the occupied territories, in Israel, and around the world. Most important among the various Palestinian and Arab groups was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, established in 1964, which initially committed itself to armed struggle as the only way to liberate the homeland. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Palestinian groups launched attacks against Israeli and Jewish targets around the world, including a massacre of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. The Israeli government responded with an assassination campaign against the organizers of the massacre, a bombing and a raid on the PLO headquarters in Lebanon. On October 6, 1973, the Egyptian and Syrian armies launched a surprise attack against Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights, opening the Yom Kippur War. The war ended on October 25 with Israel repelling Egyptian and Syrian forces, but having suffered over 2,500 soldiers killed in a war which collectively took 10 to 35,000 lives in about 20 days. An internal inquiry exonerated the government of responsibility for failures before and during the war, but public anger forced Prime Minister Golda Meir to resign. In July 1976, an airliner was hijacked in flight from Israel to France by Palestinian guerrillas and landed at Entebbe International Airport, Uganda. Israeli commandos rescued 102 out of 106 Israeli hostages. Peace process. The 1977 Knesset elections marked a major turning point in Israeli political history as Menachem Begin's Likud party took control from the Labour Party. Later that year, Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat made a trip to Israel and spoke before the Knesset in what was the first recognition of Israel by an Arab head of state. Sadat and Begin signed the Camp David Accords, 1978, and the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, 1979. In return, Israel withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula and agreed to enter negotiations over an autonomy for Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. On March 11, 1978, a PLO guerrilla raid from Lebanon led to the Coastal Road Massacre. Israel responded by launching an invasion of southern Lebanon to destroy PLO bases. Most PLO fighters withdrew, but Israel was able to secure southern Lebanon until a UN force and the Lebanese army could take over. The PLO soon resumed its insurgency against Israel. In the next few years, the PLO infiltrated the south and kept up a sporadic shelling across the border. Israel carried out numerous retaliatory attacks. Meanwhile, Begin's government provided incentives for Israelis to settle in the occupied West Bank, increasing friction with the Palestinians there. The Jerusalem Law, 1980, was believed by some to reaffirm Israel's 1967 annexation of Jerusalem by government decree, and reignited international controversy over the status of the city. No Israeli legislation has defined the territory of Israel, and no act specifically included East Jerusalem therein. In 1981, Israel effectively annexed the Golan Heights. The international community largely rejected these moves, with the UN Security Council declaring both the Jerusalem Law and the Golan Heights Law null and void. Several waves of Ethiopian Jews immigrated to Israel since the 1980s, while between 1990 and 1994, immigration from the post-Soviet states increased Israel's population by 12%. On June 7, 1981, during the Iran-Iraq War, the Israeli Air Force destroyed Iraq's sole nuclear reactor under construction just outside Baghdad to impede Iraq's nuclear weapons program. Following a series of PLO attacks in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to destroy the PLO bases. In the first 6 days, the Israelis destroyed the military forces of the PLO in Lebanon and decisively defeated the Syrians. An Israeli government inquiry, the Kahan Commission, would later hold Begin and several Israeli generals indirectly responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacre and hold Defense Minister Ariel Sharon as bearing personal responsibility. Sharon was forced to resign. In 1985, Israel responded to a Palestinian terrorist attack in Cyprus by bombing the PLO headquarters in Tunisia. Israel withdrew from most of Lebanon in 1986, but maintained a borderland buffer zone in southern Lebanon until 2000, from where Israeli forces engaged in conflict with Hezbollah. The First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli rule, broke out in 1987, with waves of uncoordinated demonstrations and violence in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Over the following 6 years, the Intifada became more organized and included economic and cultural measures aimed at disrupting the Israeli occupation. More than 1,000 people were killed. During the 1991 Gulf War, the PLO supported Saddam Hussein and Iraqi missile attacks against Israel. Despite public outrage, Israel heeded American calls to refrain from hitting back. In 1992, Yitzhak Rabin became prime minister following an election in which his party called for compromise with Israel's neighbors. The following year, Shimon Peres on behalf of Israel and Mahmoud Abbas for the PLO signed the Oslo Accords, which gave the Palestinian National Authority, PNA, the right to govern parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The PLO also recognized Israel's right to exist and pledged an end to terrorism. In 1994, the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed, making Jordan the second Arab country to normalize relations with Israel. Arab public support for the accords was damaged by the continuation of Israeli settlements and checkpoints and the deterioration of economic conditions. Israeli public support for the accords waned after Palestinian suicide attacks. In November 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amir, a far-right Jew who opposed the accords. During Benjamin Netanyahu's premiership at the end of the 1990s, Israel agreed to withdraw from Hebron, though this was never ratified or implemented, and signed the Y River Memorandum, giving greater control to the PNA. Ehud Barak, elected prime minister in 1999, withdrew forces from southern Lebanon and conducted negotiations with PNA chairman Yasser Arafat and U.S. President Bill Clinton at the 2000 Camp David Summit. Barak offered a plan for the establishment of a Palestinian state, including the entirety of the Gaza Strip and over 90% of the West Bank with Jerusalem as a shared capital. Each side blamed the other for the failure. In late 2000, after a controversial visit by Likud leader Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount, the Second Intifada began. It would continue for the next 4.5 years. Suicide bombings were a recurrent feature of the Intifada. Some commentators contend that the Intifada was pre-planned by Arafat due to the collapse of peace talks. Sharon became prime minister in a 2001 election, He carried out his plan to unilaterally withdraw from the Gaza Strip and spearheaded the construction of the Israeli West Bank barrier, ending the Intifada. Between 2000 and 2008, 1,063 Israelis, 5,517 Palestinians, and 64 foreign citizens have been killed. In 2006, a Hezbollah artillery assault on Israel's northern border communities and a cross-border abduction of 2 Israeli soldiers precipitated the month-long Second Lebanon War. In 2007, the Israeli Air Force destroyed a nuclear reactor in Syria. In 2008, a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel collapsed. The 2008 to 2009 Gaza war lasted 3 weeks and ended after Israel announced a unilateral ceasefire. Hamas announced its own ceasefire, with its own conditions of complete withdrawal and opening of border crossings. Despite neither the rocket launchings nor Israeli retaliatory strikes having completely stopped, the fragile ceasefire remained. In what Israel described as a response to more than 100 Palestinian rocket attacks on southern Israeli cities, Israel began an operation in the Gaza Strip in 2012, lasting 8 days. Israel started another operation in Gaza following an escalation of rocket attacks by Hamas in July 2014. In May 2021, another round of fighting took place in Gaza and Israel, lasting 11 days. By the 2010s, the increasing regional cooperation between Israel and Arab League countries have been established, culminating in the signing of the Abraham Accords. The Israeli security situation shifted from the traditional Arab-Israeli conflict towards the Iran-Israel proxy conflict and direct confrontation with Iran during the Syrian civil war. On October 7, 2023, Palestinian militant groups from Gaza, led by Hamas, launched a series of coordinated attacks on Israel, leading to the start of the 2023 Israel-Hamas war. On that day, approximately 1,300 Israelis, predominantly civilians, were killed in communities near the Gaza Strip border and during a music festival. Over 200 hostages, including elders, women, and children as young as 9 months, were kidnapped and taken to the Gaza Strip. Geography. Israel is located in the Levant area of the Fertile Crescent. The country is at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, bounded by Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan and the West Bank to the east, and Egypt and the Gaza Strip to the southwest. It lies between latitudes 29 degrees and 34 degrees north, and longitudes 34 degrees and 36 degrees east. The sovereign territory of Israel, according to the demarcation lines of the 1949 armistice agreements, and excluding all territories captured by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War, is approximately 20,770 square kilometers, 8,019 square miles, of which 2% is water. However, Israel is so narrow, 100 kilometers at its widest, compared to 400 kilometers from north to south, that the exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean is double the land area of the country. The total area under Israeli law, including East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, is 22,072 square kilometers, 8,522 square miles, and the total area under Israeli control, including the military-controlled and partially Palestinian-governed territory of the West Bank, is 27,799 square kilometers, 10,733 square miles. Despite its small size, Israel is home to a variety of geographic features, from the Negev Desert in the south to the inland fertile Jezreel Valley, mountain ranges of the Galilee, Carmel, and toward the Golan in the north. The Israeli coastal plain on the shores of the Mediterranean is home to most of the nation's population. East of the Central Highlands lies the Jordan Rift Valley, a small part of the 6,500-kilometer, 4,039 miles, Great Rift Valley. The Jordan River runs along the Jordan Rift Valley, from Mount Hermon through the Hula Valley and the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea, the lowest point on the surface of the earth. Further south is the Araba, ending with the Gulf of Eilat, part of the Red Sea. Maktesh, or erosion cirques, are unique to the Negev and the Sinai Peninsula, the largest being the Maktesh Ramon at 38 kilometers in length. Israel has the largest number of plant species per square meter of the countries in the Mediterranean basin. Israel contains 4 terrestrial ecoregions: Eastern Mediterranean conifer sclerophyllous broadleaf forests, Southern Anatolian montane conifer and deciduous forests, Arabian desert, and Mesopotamian shrub desert. The forests accounted for 8.5% of the country's area in 2016, up from 2% in 1948, as the result of a large-scale forest planting program by the Jewish National Fund. Tectonics and seismicity. The Jordan Rift Valley is the result of tectonic movements within the Dead Sea Transform (DSF) fault system. The DSF forms the transform boundary between the African plate to the west and the Arabian plate to the east. The Golan Heights and all of Jordan are part of the Arabian plate, while the Galilee, West Bank, Coastal Plain, and Negev along with the Sinai Peninsula are on the African plate. This tectonic disposition leads to a relatively high seismic activity. The entire Jordan Valley segment is thought to have ruptured repeatedly, for instance during the last two major earthquakes along this structure in 749 and 1033. The deficit and slip that has built up since the 1033 event is sufficient to cause an earthquake of MW 7.4. The most catastrophic known earthquakes occurred in 31 BCE, 363, 749, and 1033 CE, that is every ca 400 years on average. 301. Destructive earthquakes leading to serious loss of life strike about every 80 years. While stringent construction regulations are in place and recently built structures are earthquake safe, as of 2007 many public buildings as well as 50,000 residential buildings did not meet the new standards and were expected to collapse if exposed to a strong earthquake. Climate. Temperatures in Israel vary widely, especially during the winter. Coastal areas, such as those of Tel Aviv and Haifa, have a typical Mediterranean climate with cool, rainy winters and long, hot summers. The area of Beersheba and the northern Negev have a semi-arid climate with hot summers, cool winters, and fewer rainy days. The southern Negev and the Arava areas have a desert climate with very hot, dry summers, and mild winters with few days of rain. The highest temperature in the world outside Africa and North America as of 2021, 54 degrees Celsius 129 degrees Fahrenheit, was recorded in 1942 in the Tyrezvi kibbutz in the northern Jordan River Valley. Mountainous regions can be windy and cold, and areas at elevation of 750 meters, 2,460 feet, or more, same elevation as Jerusalem, will usually receive at least one snowfall each year. From May to September, rain in Israel is rare. There are 4 different phytogeographic regions in Israel, due to the country's location between the temperate and tropical zones. For this reason, the flora and fauna are extremely diverse. There are 2,867 known species of plants in Israel. Of these, at least 253 species are introduced and non-native. There are 380 Israeli nature reserves. With scarce water resources, Israel has developed various water-saving technologies, including drip irrigation. 310. Better source needed. The considerable sunlight available for solar energy makes Israel the leading nation in solar energy use per capita. Practically every house uses solar panels for water heating. The Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection has reported that climate change will have a decisive impact on all areas of life, particularly for vulnerable populations. Government and politics. Israel has a parliamentary system, proportional representation, and universal suffrage. A member of parliament supported by a parliamentary majority becomes the prime minister. Usually this is the chair of the largest party. The prime minister is the head of government and of cabinet. The president is head of state, with limited and largely 120-member parliament, known as the Knesset. Membership of the Knesset is based on proportional representation of political parties, with a 3.25% electoral threshold, which in practice has resulted in coalition governments. Residents of Israeli settlements in the West Bank are eligible to vote, 316, and after the 2015 election, 10 of the 120 members of the Knesset, 8%, were settlers. Parliamentary elections are scheduled every 4 years, but unstable coalitions or a no-confidence vote can dissolve a government earlier. The first Arab-led party was established in 1988, and as of 2022, Arab-led parties hold about 10% of seats. The Basic Law, the Knesset, 1958, and its amendments prevent a party list from running for election to the Knesset if its objectives or actions include the negation of the existence of the State of Israel as the state of the Jewish people. The basic laws of Israel function as an uncodified constitution. In its basic laws, Israel defines itself as a Jewish and democratic state, and the nation-state of exclusively the Jewish people. In 2003, the Knesset began to draft an official constitution based on these laws. Israel has no official religion, but the definition of the state as Jewish and democratic creates a strong connection with Judaism. On July 19, 2018, the Knesset passed a basic law that characterizes the State of Israel as principally a nation-state of the Jewish people, and Hebrew as its official language. The bill ascribes an undefined, special status to the Arabic language. The same bill gives Jews a unique right to national self-determination and views the developing of Jewish settlement in the country as a national interest, empowering the government to take steps to encourage, advance, and implement this interest. Legal system. Israel has a three-tier court system. At the lowest level are magistrate courts, situated in most cities across the country. Above them are district courts, serving as both appellate courts and courts of first instance. They are situated in 5 of Israel's 6 districts. The third and highest tier is the Supreme Court, located in Jerusalem. It serves a dual role as the highest court of appeals and the High Court of Justice. In the latter role, the Supreme Court rules as a court of first instance, allowing individuals, both citizens and non-citizens, to petition against the decisions of state authorities. Israel's legal system combines 3 legal traditions: English common law, civil law, and Jewish law. It is based on the principle of stare decisis, precedent, and is an adversarial system. Court cases are decided by professional judges with no role for juries. 328. Better source needed. Marriage and divorce are under the jurisdiction of the religious courts: Jewish, Muslim, Druze, and Christian. The election of judges is carried out by a selection committee chaired by the Justice Minister, currently Yariv Levin. Israel's basic law. Human dignity and liberty seeks to defend human rights and liberties in Israel. The United Nations Human Rights Council and Israeli human rights organization Adalah have highlighted that this law does not in fact contain a general provision for equality and non-discrimination, as a result of enclave law. Large portions of Israeli civil law are applied to Israeli settlements and Israeli residents in the occupied territories. Administrative divisions. The State of Israel is divided into 6 main administrative districts, known as Mehazot, Hebrew, singular, Mahoz, Center, Haifa, Jerusalem, North, South, and Tel Aviv districts, as well as the Judea and Samaria area in the West Bank. All of the Judea and Samaria area and parts of the Jerusalem and northern districts are not recognized internationally as part of Israel. Districts are further divided into 15 sub-districts known as Nafit, Hebrew, singular, Nafa, which are themselves partitioned into 50 natural regions. Israeli citizenship law. The 2 primary pieces of legislation relating to Israeli citizenship are the 1950 Law of Return and 1952 Citizenship Law. The Law of Return grants Jews the unrestricted right to immigrate to Israel and obtain Israeli citizenship. Individuals born within the country receive citizenship at birth if at least one parent is a citizen. Israeli law defines Jewish nationality as distinct from Israeli nationality. In fact, the Supreme Court of Israel has ruled that an Israeli nationality does not exist. A Jewish national is defined in Israel law as any person practicing Judaism and their descendants. Legislation has defined Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people since 2018. In 1967, as a result of the Six-Day War, Israel captured and occupied the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. Israel also captured the Sinai Peninsula, but returned it to Egypt as part of the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. Between 1982 and 2000, Israel occupied part of southern Lebanon, in what was known as the Security Belt. Since Israel's capture of these territories, Israeli settlements and military installations have been built within each of them, except Lebanon. The Golan Heights and East Jerusalem have been fully incorporated into Israel under Israeli law, but not under international law. Israel has applied civilian law to both areas and granted their inhabitants permanent residency status and the ability to apply for citizenship. The UN Security Council has declared the annexation of the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem to be null and void, and continues to view the territories as occupied. The status of East Jerusalem in any future peace settlement has at times been a difficult issue in negotiations between Israeli governments and representatives of the Palestinians. The West Bank excluding East Jerusalem is known in Israeli law as the Judea and Samaria area. The almost 400,000 Israeli settlers residing in the area are considered part of Israel's population. have Knesset representation and are subject to a large part of Israel's civil and criminal laws, and their output is considered part of Israel's economy. The land itself is not considered part of Israel under Israeli law, as Israel has consciously refrained from annexing the territory without ever relinquishing its legal claim to the land or defining a border. Israeli political opposition to annexation is primarily due to the perceived demographic threat of incorporating the West Bank's Palestinian population into Israel. Outside of the Israeli settlements, the West Bank remains under direct Israeli military rule, and Palestinians in the area cannot become Israeli citizens. The international community maintains that Israel does not have sovereignty in the West Bank and considers Israel's control of the area to be the longest military occupation in modern history. The West Bank was occupied and annexed by Jordan in 1950, following the 1949 armistice agreements. Only Britain recognized this annexation, and Jordan has since ceded its claim to the territory to the PLO. The population are mainly Palestinians, including refugees of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. From their occupation in 1967 until 1993, the Palestinians living in these territories were under Israeli military administration. Since the Israel-PLO letters of recognition, most of the Palestinian population and cities have been under the internal jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority and only partial Israeli military control, although Israel has redeployed its troops and reinstated full military administration during periods of unrest. In response to increasing attacks during the Second Intifada, the Israeli government started to construct the Israeli West Bank barrier. When completed, approximately 13% of the barrier will be constructed on the Green Line or in Israel, with 87% inside the West Bank. Israel's claim of universal suffrage has been questioned due to its blurred territorial boundaries and its simultaneous extension of voting rights to Israeli settlers in the occupied territories and denial of voting rights to their Palestinian neighbors, as well as the alleged ethnocratic nature of the state. The Gaza Strip is considered to be a foreign territory under Israeli law. Israel, along with Egypt, operates a land, air, and sea blockade of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip was occupied by Israel after 1967. In 2005, as part of Israel's unilateral disengagement plan, Israel removed its settlers and forces from the territory. However, it continues to maintain control of its airspace and waters. The international community, including numerous international humanitarian organizations and bodies of the UN, consider Gaza to remain occupied. Following the 2007 Battle of Gaza, when Hamas assumed power in the Gaza Strip, Israel tightened control of the Gaza crossings along its border, as well as by sea and air, and prevented persons from entering and exiting except for isolated cases it deemed humanitarian. Gaza has a border with Egypt, and an agreement between Israel, the European Union, and the PA governed how border crossing would take place. The application of democracy to its Palestinian citizens, and the selective application of Israeli democracy in the Israeli-controlled Palestinian territory